So I just finished reading a book last night, and I've been really excited to talk about it, and I've been wanting to make this video all day. I've been at work, I couldn't wait. It is a book called Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward. I had never read this author before, and this was kind of a blind thing. Somebody else got this for me, and I got them something, and we both kind of got stuff blind just by reading the blurbs. This was published in 2023, so published this last year. It does say the author of The Last House on Needless Street, which is a book that I've heard of, that I've heard it's actually really good, so I'll probably check it out now. This is such a weird novel. Like, I'll read the blurb and then I'll kind of give my own interpretation of the basic premise of the book, I guess. In a cottage overlooking the windswept Maine coast, Wilder Harlow has begun the last book he will ever write. It is the story about the sun-drenched summer of his youth in Whistler Bay and the blood-stained path of the killer that stalked his vacation town. About the terrible secret he and his companions Nat and Harper discovered entombed in the coves off the bay, and how the pact they swore that day echoed down the decades, forever shaping their lives. But the more Wilder writes, the less he trusts himself and his memory. He starts to see things that can't be real. Notes hidden in the cottage from an old friend now dead, a woman with dark hair drowning in the icy waters below calling for help, entire chapters he doesn't recall typing, appearing overnight. Who or what is haunting Wilder? No longer able to trust his own eyes, Wilder begins to fear that this will not only be his last book, but the last thing he ever does. And then it goes on to say, like, oh, this is a story about friendship and betrayal, dark obsessions, and the impossibility of escaping your own story. I hate it when blurbs end with stupid buzzwords like that. It's like, that doesn't make me want to... just don't. It would have been better if he just stopped it at, but the last thing he ever does. The thing about this book, don't want to give any spoilers, and there's certain things I want to talk about this book that I would have to give spoilers. So, if anybody wants me to make a second video where I talk about spoilers and specific stuff, I will gladly do that, and I will label the video as spoilers so nobody clicks on it, like, hopefully, as long as people read. So the thing about this novel is that every chapter is basically a different piece of writing from a character in the book, and like, some of the writings are from different characters, but a lot of them are of Wilder Harlow. Makes it really interesting. One thing that I find strange about the book is that it is written in the present tense. So even though, like, first page is called The Dagger Man of Whistler Bay, from the unpublished memoir by Wilder Harlow, June 1989. So if he's writing a memoir about what happened, why would he write it in the present tense? It's a little bit strange, if you ask me. It's nothing that ruins the book or anything like that, but it's one of those things that's kind of like, huh, I wonder if I can show it on here. But quotation marks are like a single, like, floating thing instead of two, which is weird. If you look at the back, reading about Catriona Ward, that person right there, the person that wrote the book, it says she was born in Washington, D.C. and grew up in the United States, Kenya, Madagascar, Yemen, and Morocco. I don't know if that's how you pronounce Yemen, if that's Yemen or Yemen. And she studied English at the University of Oxford and earned her master's degree in creative writing at the University of East Anglia. If you look her up online, it says that she is a British-American writer. So there's a lot of things in there. I don't know if they normally do, if, like, English, it has that quotation mark thing or what, but she also, there's a lot of things, like, she uses S instead of Z for things like realize or recognize and things like that. She spells things like pajamas instead of P-A-J-A-M-A-S, she spells it P-Y-J-A-M-A-S. I don't know if that's a British thing or not, but this is one of those books, you never know where it's gonna go, and things pieced together bit by bit. It feels very experimental in its writing style, not just the fact that it's different writings from different people. They're kind of writing memoirs, and the cool thing about that too is when it's a different character, she actually gives, like, a different writing voice to that character, which is really cool. I don't want to say the structure's all over the place, but it definitely there'll be, like, it's talking about the memoir of Wilder Harlow, and then the next chapter is talking about another character, and it's actually, like, 10 years before that memoir, and then it goes on to another piece of writing that's actually, instead of 10 years behind or back at that present, it's actually in the future of that one. And at first it's like, huh, but then, like, you understand why, and it's actually perfect for this kind of story. I actually really like how it's structured and how Catriona Ward laid it all out. I will say, though, there's definitely some paragraphs and some descriptions that feel like they're missing something and feel like they could have been revised a little bit before publishing. And it's like, it's things where maybe she's being vague for a reason, or maybe I think what usually happens is she's trying to show, not tell. And she's doing it in a weird way, though, where that it makes it feel a little bit awkward. So, like, say, I'll come up with a general, like, made-up example right now. Say there's a character that's been thinking about something, and or he wonders about something, or he thinks that he has found the truth for something, but he doesn't talk about it at all. And then she'll write something in a way that I guess that's how she reveals it, but it feels awkward. Okay, I'll take an actual example from the book, but I'll omit certain things so that it's not a spoiler. Even though if I said the actual details, it wouldn't be a big spoiler; it'd just be like a minor spoiler for that scene. So there are these scenes where Wilder, Nat, and Harper go to this cave, and they have come up with this story about a sea god. And they've come up with a way that you can give a sacrifice to the sea god, but it's not a human sacrifice, it's more like a secret. You tell one of your deepest secrets into the cave while somebody holds you over the water in this weird way. Which the way that they hold... That's one description that also doesn't make sense, the way that somebody holds the other person over the water. I still don't really get how that works, but... So, one of the characters, is like, oh, I'll tell a secret. Yeah, I'll go tell a secret. And there's a certain secret. He keeps saying that he wants to say that secret, right? And then, instead of saying that secret, they say something else once they get to that point. And then they're like, oh man, I didn't want to actually say that out loud. And it's something that's like, I feel like I get it. And I'm not saying that in that particular scene it's a bad thing. In that particular scene, that's not really too bad. But that's just like the best example I could think of off the top of my head that's not a big spoiler. And but it's like one of those things that you'd think that there would be some inkling of that thought process beforehand. Instead, we're like, when did he think about that? And why did he say that instead of the other thing? Because it's two completely different things. It's weird. But like I said, I think that's like Catriona Ward's way of trying to like not tell you every single detail as it goes along. Maybe to add a little bit of suspense too, of like, oh wow, like that came out of nowhere. But like also just ultimately like trying not to bash you over the head with information beforehand. Unlike a lot of other books where somebody will just be like thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it, and then you start to be like, okay, we get it, you know what I mean? But I don't know, you'd think there'd be a little bit of foreshadowing for that thought to come up, because there's plenty of foreshadowing in this book, and the foreshadowing was really good. There's also a scene where the characters are flailing in the water, and I still don't know why. And then one of them says something about a certain sea creature, and it's like, is that what that was supposed to be? Because that doesn't sound like that's what that was. And then it's never actually like... Because one of the other characters is like, oh, I don't know. And I don't know. I don't get it. And it's actually after one of those cave scenes. So if anybody else has read it, hopefully you know what I'm talking about. I actually reread that section plenty of times. And then it's never actually said about, like, what even happened. And I guess I don't get it. And then there's one scene where a character is talking about needing to get his typewriter fixed. He's like, oh, I'll get my typewriter fixed after this happens. And then he talks about something that he's been planning to do, which would make that null and void. And it's like, you never said anything about that before. I might have to make a spoiler video just so I can actually talk about these passages and like read them out loud and stuff like that without worrying about anybody being spoiled by anything, because it's hard to explain them. But, it's little things. they don't really show up like too often, but when they do show up, it's kind of there have been some paragraphs where I've had to reread a few times, and I'm like, I still don't really know exactly what the author is going for there. And like I said, it feels like if she just added in like one or two small details, it would actually fix the problem. It's my biggest pet peeve about this novel. Like, if that was not prevalent in this novel, I'd probably give it a lot higher of a rating than I'm gonna give it. But it's one of those things, I can't completely ignore it. It definitely has made some reading sessions just make me scratch my head. You know what I mean? And I read a lot of like other authors that do a lot of omission, I guess. Thing that comes to mind is H.P. Lovecraft. While I'm not like the biggest fan of the way he writes a lot of times, I do like the way that he omits a lot of information so that your imagination fills in the blank. I don't know if that's what she's going for here, but like, I'm just trying to say that I'm not somebody that usually gets confused about things like that where there feels like details missing. Usually, like, I can usually fill in the blanks, and it's like, this is just one of those instances where I'm like scratching my head. It's not, I swear it's not me, I'm not dumb. But it also kind of makes me want to reread the book and annotate it. You know what I mean? I kind of, like, I haven't really annotated books ever, but I kind of want to annotate this book. I'd buy a different copy so that I'd have one copy that's untarnished and one copy that's annotated. But just because there are a lot of details that end up recurring and then they end up being actually really important later, it would be cool to take notes on stuff like that. But also, maybe it'd help me understand passages like those. I don't know. But other than that, I do like the way that she writes. She kind of has a minimalist style, which is another reason that makes me wonder if maybe there is a method to her madness in certain passages like those. But kind of minimalist. It's not super wordy or ornate. She's pretty quick and to the point. Not in a way where it feels like it's stiff or anything. You don't feel like it needs any more, you know what I mean? Except for certain paragraphs like the ones I talked about, but for the most part, if that makes sense. It makes me think of, I need to read Ernest Hemingway. He came up with an iceberg theory for writing, where you write in a minimalist style, and you omit certain things so that you give the reader just enough information and like they fill in the blanks as they go, whether it's through their imagination or just from inference, deduction, induction, anything like that. So I don't know if she is a fan of Ernest Hemingway. I don't know if she took her writing style from that sort of theory, but it kind of makes me think of that. I just need to read Ernest Hemingway so that I could make comparisons like that and have them not be unfounded or anything. There's also some times where she uses personification and it's beautiful. Sometimes that she uses personification and it's confusing. I wonder if I can find a specific passage that I'm thinking of, because it will not be a spoiler. Okay, I'm way too far. God damn it. I can't fucking find it. God damn it. Here we go. I think I finally found it. Oh. I finally found the passage that I was looking for, but then it turns out I realized what he was actually saying, and it's actually a spoiler if I talk about it. And it's one of those things where he's talking about fixing his typewriter in one paragraph, and then the next one, he's talking about doing something as soon as writing his novel's finished, but he just describes it vaguely, so you're thinking he's talking about fixing the typewriter, and he's actually not talking about fixing the typewriter. He's talking about doing something completely different, but it changes from one idea to the other without any warning, without any indication, and in a way that makes you think he's talking about the thing before it. So keep in mind when you're reading, if you read this book, which I do recommend it, it's really, the story is so good, the characters are great. There's going to be some things where you might have to reread it a few times and be like, what just happened? It's not very often in it. I mean, we're talking, 300 and something pages, 339 pages. We're talking about like a handful of instances where this happens throughout the book, but it's definitely, if you're like me, it's gonna make you pause and just be like, let me process that for a second. So I guess I've talked about the writing long enough. So story-wise, it's really good. I feel like I would call it a fast-paced read. I feel like it's fairly fast-paced. I guess maybe it might be medium-paced because it's not like... It takes a while for one of the big events to happen. But at the same time, before that, there's all these little events happening. It feels like, because it kind of goes through 2 summers pretty quickly, like within maybe the first 50 pages or so, something like that. I'm just making a guesstimate off the top of my head. And so in like that case, like we're definitely seeing these friendships grow at a fairly rapid pace. So I'd call it fast paced. I never felt like anything was dragging at all. A lot does happen in the book. Things intertwined in a really cool way. So Storygraph has this thing that I find really cool. When you're reviewing a book or rating a book, it will ask you some questions, like especially about like character versus plot stuff, where it asks you if a book is character driven or if it's plot driven. It will ask you if a character having a flaw is like a big point of the story. Can't remember exactly how they word it. They word it a lot better than I do. They ask you things like, are the characters diverse? And they're not talking about like ethnicity or anything like that, but they're like, you know, you don't have like 25 people with the same personality type, you know what I mean? And they ask you if the characters are lovable and stuff like that. You can say yes, no, it's complicated, or not applicable. And I just find that really interesting because with this book, it's one of those things, while I was reading it, I was kind of thinking, maybe this is more plot-based, because a lot of the events kind of have recurring themes between them, and a lot of events are connected to other events. But when you get down to it, it actually is very character driven. So much relies on the different characters in a way that you don't really think of until you finish the book, and then you get thinking about everything. And I'm not saying this isn't a spoiler. You're not going to read the book and think about what I just said about the characters and be like, oh, that motherfucker. It's just one of those things that's kind of interesting. Just when I personally was trying to think of, was it character and plot driven? I was thinking about saying it's a mix. But no, it's definitely very character driven. And so if you really like character driven horror, like I do, this is definitely a good choice for you. Speaking of character-driven stuff, watching a lot of Stephen King talking in public and in interviews and stuff, he talks about how all of his stuff just about is character-driven, because he said that sometimes people say that his stuff is plot-driven. He's like, no. Because when he sits down, he doesn't really have much of a plan for the plot. Sometimes he'll have a basic premise, or maybe he has like the premise and the ending in mind. But what he likes to do is he likes to create good and interesting characters, and then he just wants to follow them, see what happens to them. I don't know if Catriona Ward is that type of writer, if she outlines stuff, or if she does like Stephen King and just kind of follows the characters. But that is very much what we're doing as the reader in this novel, is we are following these characters, seeing what's going to happen next. So I thought that'd be something interesting to share. It is really cool that this book is on the Maine coast, because I live in Maine. And it's a very unique vacation town. I did really fall in love with the setting of Whistler Bay. I feel like I can picture that place so perfectly in my head. I was never really one for playing on the beach as a kid. I was more of a backyard and inside kind of kid. Reading about these teenagers, it starts off with them 16, befriending each other and using this beach town as a building block for their adventures and just always hanging out there. Fills me with a little bit of that, I don't want to say childlike wonder, but it definitely brings back that childish want for adventure. You know what I mean? While I was reading this book, it just sounded so nice and cozy. I wished I was there at the beach. And maybe that's just a symptom of when you're reading a book versus watching a movie. I've thought about this when I'm thinking of why books are always better than the movies, except for a minority of times. Especially when the movie is actually like a really faithful adaptation to the book. I think a lot of it boils down to, in a book, generally, if it's a novel length, it's usually probably going to be at least 300 pages, if not more. Might be a little bit less than that. But then you can only go so much less than that before it starts going into novella territory. But like this is 339 pages. You spend all this time with these characters in these settings. You almost bond with them during that time. Unless they're just really poorly written, then it's kind of like, why are you still reading it? Which I'm definitely guilty of that sometimes. Versus a movie, you're spending time with these settings and these characters for only usually an hour and a half, sometimes 2 to 2.5 hours. Not very many movies will go past that, but there are adaptations that are longer than that. And yeah, there are TV series that are adaptations, but then usually they start to stretch out a little too much, where the characters and settings outstay their welcome. But in a book, you're bonding with them for all this time. And I feel like I spent so much time in Whistler Bay on that beach. And maybe that's what helps me overlook some of those awkward writing instances. Also coupled with the fact that there is also some really great writing in there and great, fantastic plot. The ending is really interesting, and I would love to hear what people think of it. If they decide to go read it or if they have read it. But also on this video I would politely ask not to give spoilers for anybody, or if you do, like, please put that at the top of your comment. Be like, warning, spoilers, 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 all caps. Try to make it so people see it, so they don't open your comment and read it, because this is definitely one of those books. There's so many things, there's so many minor things, if you talk about them it kind of spoils certain parts of the plot. Because once the person starts reading it and they attune to that, then a lot of the bigger points of the plot are spoiled as well. Kind of frustrating to talk about in that way. You almost form an emotional bond with some of these characters. It's just such an interesting, unique book. I really liked it, and I'm glad that I got that book in that blind sort of swap. I will say, when I started reading this book, at first, I was kind of worried if I was going to like it or not, because the main character, Wilder, seems so odd in the beginning. I wasn't sure if he was supposed to be like almost like a bit of a sociopath, or if he had some kind of disability. He just seemed kind of a creep. Now that I've read the whole thing, I wonder if maybe that's just, I think it's more social awkwardness than anything else. So, if you start reading it and you think like the main character seems weird, push through it. It's my advice for that. Okay, so I think I've rambled on enough about this book. I'm starting to realize now that a lot of the stuff I really want to talk about have spoilers. It's like a seaside horror novel with a lot of beauty and a lot of grotesqueness in it. There are some descriptions that I fell in so much love with, because they're so grotesque and gory. I'm really excited to try out some of Catriona Ward's other stuff. All in all, you've seen me talk about some things that I love. See me talk about some things that I think could have used some improvement. My overall rating, you might be wondering. And I said before that the rating probably would have been higher if not for some of these awkward moments in the prose. It was tough. It was really tough for me to rank this. Ultimately, I settled on 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was really good. I read a little bit more than half the book in one day. I had a few reading sessions before that where my reading was a little bit lagging. I was getting into the book, especially after the second time I was reading it, where it started bringing some foreshadowing, and I was like, ooh, things are starting to get really good. But like me personally, I think it's because when I started reading it, I was a little bit sick, so I kind of had some brain fog. But just me with my reading, I'm not the fastest reader in the world as it is, so I just had a few reading sessions where I just read a small amount each time. And then it just got to a point around the middle point where I needed to know. I needed to know everything. And I finished it that night, 200 pages that I read in one sitting. And I know there's a lot of people that actually do that all the time. I'm the kind of person, I don't really do that often. I usually don't really I feel like I don't have the time to do it. Maybe I really do, but I'm lucky if I even read 100 pages in one sitting. So to me, like, that's a good sign of a book. If I can sit there and just read for hours and hours straight, that automatically makes it like pretty high rating for me. Maybe on a reread I'll bump this up to 4.5. If I do end up doing that reread or that annotation, I'll do a video about it and tell you guys if I think this deserves more than 4 stars. 4 stars is still really solid, still very good. Do recommend this book. Especially, you know, it's a little bit challenging because of the way that it is structured and the way that some things jump around a little bit. Some things do take a little bit of thinking. But I do like that part about this too, is that there are a lot of thought-provoking points to this. So it's not really the most straightforward read out there. It's not tough challenging, it's just a little bit challenging. So if you're down for that, and you want to see like a really cool, almost experimental sort of novel, you know, this is definitely like, this is a good choice for you. And I'd love to hear what anybody else thinks about it. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you going to add this to your to-read list, or are you going to steer clear away from it? I can't remember if I actually went over the genre. It is a horror novel, but the horror isn't really in your face. There is some body horror stuff because it does get grotesque at some points. Whenever that stuff comes up, it kind of goes away pretty quickly. A lot of it is a little bit more on the psychological horror side. And then if I were to give it a genre other than horror, I'd definitely call it mystery. There's a lot of mystery to it. It's like a mystery horror. Those are my thoughts on Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward. Hope you enjoyed watching my videos, and I hope you like my insights. I will hopefully see you guys in the next video.